Hi guys, Mrs. Wright Nearson here. It has been quite a while. I am so sorry. Ooh, my hair's crazy. We've been super busy. But I'm back today to read a couple of chapters with you. We are on chapter 22 of The War I Finally Won. Let's get started. Chapter 22. On the day Lady Thornton moved in with us, she had handed Susan her ration book and said, "Don't worry, I intend to do my bit." She might be willing to do war work, but her housekeeping bit was not large. Jamie mopped and dusted more than she did, and Jamie and I did nearly all the shopping and cooking. Lady Thornton never even helped us with washing up. She said, "You all understand that sort of thing so much better than me." Of course, she could only start to understand the shopping by sometimes actually doing the shopping, and I suppose she did know it. The day after our fire watch, she took everyone's books, including Ruth's, and spent 2 weeks' worth of meat coupons on 1 pound of lamb. 5 tiny, elegant pieces of lamb. "Lovely chops," Lady Thornton said, "with a bit of rosemary." 10 shillings? Susan shouted. It was the first time in months I'd seen her so angry. Meat was rationed by price, not amount. Each person in Britain, no matter whether they were rich or poor, was only allowed to spend 1 shilling per week on meat. If you wanted lots of meat, you stuck to the cheap stuff. If you wanted higher quality, you got hardly any at all. "Susan, dear, you're a marvelous cook, but the cuts you've been choosing are dreadful." Lady Thornton held up a chop. "Only look." The butcher said it was the best he'd had in weeks. "We can't afford the best," Susan said. These children need to eat meat more than once a fortnight. What am I supposed to feed them tomorrow?" Lady Thornton set the chop down. "Well, perhaps eggs?" The new egg ration was 1 egg per person per week. Per week? That's not much at all. "Or something," said Lady Thornton. Susan sighed. "We can't give them back," she said. "I suppose we might as well enjoy them." Lady Thornton smiled. "I'll select a bottle of wine." She'd brought crates of wine over from the Thornton house. Susan seared the chops in a hot pan with a sprinkling of pepper and rosemary and made a fancy kind of gravy. The chops smelled fantastic, but were half the size of my fist. Ooh, that's small. Half the size of that? Teeny tiny. That was all the meat we'd get for the next 2 weeks. "A good meal lifts the spirits," Lady Thornton said as we sat down to eat. I stared at her. Her face froze. "Ruth," she said. Whenever Lady Thornton said Ruth's name, her face screwed up like she was smelling something nasty. "Ruth, what is that by your plate?" It was an envelope. Ruth looked down at it, saw it, and picked it up. She started to smile. "It came in today's mail," said Susan. Lady Thornton held out her hand. "Give it to me." "No," said Ruth. Her smile disappeared. "It's mine." She started to tuck the envelope into her pocket. Lady Thornton snatched it out of her hand. "Eleanor," Susan protested. "I consider it my duty," Lady Thornton replied. "Mail delivered to a German in my house?" She ripped open the envelope and shook out the piece of paper inside. Ruth cried out, soft like an owl. Lady Thornton's face went red. "I can't read a word of it. I should have known. It's all German." Ruth pushed back from the table. "How dare you!" she shouted. Bright red spots bloomed on her cheeks. She grabbed the letter, ran up the stairs to her room, and slammed and locked the door. "Shh. Cat crying." Jamie whimpered. I reached under the table and squeezed his hand. Susan said that was completely unnecessary. Lady Thornton said, "I agree. Her behavior was reprehensible." Susan looked her in the eye. "I meant your behavior." "Shh. Stop crying. It's crazy here." It's impossible for me to eat after that. I hated fighting. Susan never hit me, but Lady Thornton might. She looked ready to wallop Ruth for sure. "Eat your chops," Susan said to me. I pushed my plate away. "I'm not hungry." "Eat it," Lady Thornton commanded, through a mouthful of meat. "In wartime, we do not waste food." I looked at her. I couldn't eat that chop, not even to keep her from walloping me. Not when Ruth's chop sat untouched on her plate. "Ada is my responsibility." Susan's voice had an edge I didn't understand. "I'll be the one who decides what she does." She swept up my plate and Jamie's and Ruth's. Ada, Jamie, you may be excused. We'll save the rest of this for tomorrow. Ooh. Jamie and I washed the dishes like always. Susan and Lady Thornton sat at the table, drinking tea and talking in hard, quiet voices. I tried like anything to hear what they were saying, but Jamie splashed too much and they kept their voices down. When Lady Thornton went into the sitting room, Susan went to the larder. I wonder what the larder is. She cut 3 big slices of bread and spread them with some of the gravy she'd made for the lamb. Take these upstairs, she said to us. I nodded. She meant where Lady Thornton couldn't see. I knocked on Ruth's door. Go away, she said. It's Ada, I've got something for you. Go away. I know you're hungry. Do your ears work worse than your foot? Go away. Ooh, yikes. The next morning at breakfast, I said to Ruth, there's nothing wrong with my foot. Ruth shrugged. You can say that if you want to. My foot's fixed. Susan called it a club foot, Ruth said. You limp, you always limp, and some days you limp worse. I do not. I was lying. I knew I limped even though I tried hard not to. Ruth, Susan said, Ada prefers to keep her foot private. Ah, said Ruth, like my letters. Lady Thornton sat down in time to hear that. She didn't flinch. I have a right to know with whom you correspond. So next time you can ask me instead of opening my mail. Ruth began to eat. She didn't say who her letter was from. Lady Thornton tapped her fingers against the table. Silence stretched out. Jamie looked at me anxiously. Who wrote to you, Ruth? Susan finally asked. My mother, she said. My mother, who is by herself in an internment camp. What's an internment camp? Asked Jamie. Jail, I said. Certainly not, Lady Thornton said. Internment camps are merely places to keep watch on enemy aliens. Tell me, Ruth, what did your letter say? Ruth sniffled. None of your business. They have censors in the internment camp. If my mother wrote anything controversial, I wouldn't have gotten the letter. Lady Thornton frowned. Is that true? Of course it's true, said Ruth. Why do you think it took her so long to write to me? Not because she was writing things she shouldn't, because she's only allowed to write one letter, one single piece of paper each week. And she has to write to my father and my grandmother and our family back in Germany. And now she finally got to write to me. And I will never tell you what she said. I will go back to that camp myself first. Ruth's voice rose until she was shouting. We want you to stay here, Susan said. Lord Thornton, Susan glared at Lady Thornton, wants you to stay here. I hadn't even realized that Ruth hadn't received any letters. Maggie wrote her mother 3 times a week and me nearly as often. Jamie said, Why doesn't your mother come live with us? We've got a big enough cave. Lady Thornton made a noise in her throat, but Ruth answered first. She can't, she said. The British government won't let her. I said, In case she's a spy? Yes, Ruth said wearily, in case she's a spy. Whew. Heated up. Chapter 23. That night, Susan filled our dinner plates herself and carefully set one down in front of each of us. Lord Worlton pie. The baked mess of oatmeal and vegetables. Oatmeal and vegetables? Oh, I've never tried that before. I don't know. Ooh. Only mine, and I saw looking around the table, Ruth and Jamie's. Had cut up pieces of lamb mixed with it. Lamb and lamb gravy with wine and rosemary. Susan's and Lady Thornton's did not. With the addition of the meat, the Lord Worlton pie wasn't half as bad. Lady Thornton picked through her serving. Is this supposed to be some sort of punishment? She asked Susan. Of course not, Susan replied. You and I ate our share yesterday. The whole point of rationing is that everyone gets their fair share. Ruth's eyes flicked to mine. She didn't smile, but I felt like she was thinking a smile. I thought a smile back at her. That really was all the meat we got, though, for the next 2 straight weeks. We used up our coupons and we couldn't get more, not without buying meat on the black market, which meant illegally outside the ration. Lady Thornton had enough money to do that, but she said she also had too much honor. February continued cold and bleak. The sun rose late and set early, and between that and the blackout, it really did seem like we were living in a cave. Susan fell into a gloom. She was never as sad as she had been when we first came to live with her. She got out of bed every day, but she rarely smiled and she slept more than I thought she should. One morning, my schoolwork felt unbearable. Ruth was squirreled away with her maths and Jamie outside trying to dig a garden plot in the frozen ground. That'd be hard to do. Susan sat dully in front of her sewing machine, rearranging some pens but not stitching anything. I shoved aside my grammar book and said, "Why don't we train the dragons?" Susan looked up. "What?" "Fred says horses fought in the last big war." "Yes," she said, "and in every war before that. They're not much use in modern times, though. Not against tanks and aircraft and heavy artillery." "Right," I said. "So why not dragons?" I've been thinking it through. The kind that can fly. If we took them out of the zoos and we trained them, maybe they could attack German planes without even needing pilots on board. It would be much safer for Jonathan. A grin spread slowly across Susan's face. "Ada," she said, "you do understand that dragons are mythical creatures." As if I knew what she meant by mythical. I stared at her. "Imaginary?" said Susan. "Made up? Pretend? The stuff of fairy tales?" She coughed, then started to laugh. "My dear, oh, I'm sorry. It's wonderful. Why don't we train dragons?" She laughed harder. "That'd serve Hitler. A couple of ranks of dragons and the ghost of St. George." I'd never seen Susan laugh like this. I picked up the closest thing at hand, the grammar book, and threw it hard across the room. It nearly missed Lady Thornton coming through the front door. She bent to pick it up and smoothed it in her hands. "Ada," she said sternly, "we do not throw books." Susan was still laughing. "I know I should stop. I'm not being kind." "Stop what?" asked Lady Thornton. Susan said, "She wants to train dragons to fight Hitler." "Nobody told me they aren't real." Lady Thornton considered. "A pity they aren't," she said. "It would be an excellent plan, except I suppose the Germans would also have dragons." "Bigger dragons," Susan said. "Stronger, taller, blonder dragons." She looked ready to laugh again. "How am I supposed to know what's real and what isn't?" I almost shouted. "Nobody tells me. Nobody tells me anything." "Ada," Susan said, recovering herself. "I'm sorry I laughed, but be fair. I tell you things all the time." "Fairy tales," Lady Thornton says. "What you need is a proper dose of fairy tales. Then you can move on to mythology. I'll fetch some books from Thornton House." I said, "You have more books than what you brought here already?" "Oh my, yes. We left most of them on the shelves in the library." Imagine. Their own library. Thornton House had a library. Lady Thornton brought over volumes of fairy tales. Susan read them to Jamie and me through the rest of that dreary month. She explained after each story what was real and what wasn't. I could have guessed most of it. I already knew that animals couldn't talk and that people couldn't really fly or weren't born so small they could sleep in teacups. But it was hard to see how unicorns, for example, were less real than horses. I get it. Dragons seemed dead useful to me. Winged lizards? Why not? Angels were people with wings. It was hard to see the difference. Ruth stayed downstairs to listen to the fairy tales. "I've never heard them in English before," she said. Jamie said, "They have stories in German?" You never thought of Germans telling stories. Ruth looked offended, but then she usually did. "Of course we have stories in German," she said. "Most of these stories came from Germany. They were German first." I didn't want to believe her, but Lady Thornton pursed her lips and said it was true. "The Brothers Grimms were German," she said. "I didn't think anything good came from Germany." When I said so, Lady Thornton disagreed. "I traveled through Germany extensively when I was younger," she said. "Dresden is a beautiful city, very cultured. You can't judge the whole country by Hitler." I said, "But you judge Ruth by Hitler." Lady Thornton's head snapped up, angry. Ruth bit her lip, and Susan outright smiled. She told her. Susan finally found a book about dragons at the village library. St. George, the patron saint of England, was supposed to have killed a dragon, and so was a saint named Margaret of Antioch. It amused me to think that Maggie had been named for a dragon killer. But saints were supposed to have been real people, not imaginary, and dragons were imaginary, not real. How could a real person kill an imaginary animal? "The stories get a little mixed up," Susan said. "These particular saints lived a very long time ago, back when people were stupid like me." "Ada," said Susan, "if you say things like that, I'll make you write lines." I didn't know what write lines meant. I didn't care. I repeated, "Stupid like me." Susan made me sit at the table until I'd written the sentence I will not continue to conflate lack of intelligence with lack of knowledge 100 times. It took hours. I considered refusing to do it, but the expression on Susan's face made me pick up a pencil instead. What's conflate? I asked. Combining two ideas that ought to be kept separate, Susan said. You are going to stop doing it. Tell me all the things that are imaginary, I said. When I'm done with these stupid lines, I want to make a list. I can't, Susan said. It would be an infinite list. Anything you make up inside your head is imaginary. I thought about this. So love is imaginary? No, Susan said. Love exists outside your head. Think harder, Ada. Stop being so cross. Every day, Ruth saw me wearing my jodhpurs. Every day, she saw me go into the stables. Every day, when I came back smelling of horses and hay, she sniffed the air longingly. She looked enormously sad. Butter made me happy every single day. Lady Thornton hardly ever went to her own stables. She said she was too busy with the WVS to ride often, and she never ever did chores. You can't take Ruth with you if Lady Thornton won't allow it, Susan said. She does have that authority. I wasn't used to being envied. To my surprise, I didn't like it at all. And that's where we're going to stop for now. Bye, guys.